All right. So today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, the internet versus the web. You're about to know a lot more than most people do. People treat it like it's interchangeable, and they're really not. One is the hardware, and one is something going on over the hardware. So the internet in and of itself is just a ton of computers that are connected. A lot of the time we're using fiber optic cable, a lot of copper cable. That's one of the reasons the internet's slower in the United States is we have a lot of copper. A lot of people think they're on fiber optic and they're really not. It's fiber optic up to a certain point, then it's going over a copper cable. But basically, it's just a ton of computers connected. It's the hardware of what we think of as the internet or the web. But the internet is just the computers in that network. Basically, what's happening is you've got a bunch of computers serving things up. Just like you have a server in the restaurant, brings you some stuff, we have servers as well. You've probably heard it a lot with computers. Maybe you knew what they were talking about, maybe not. But it's basically somewhere where things are being stored, information of some kind, any kind of data. It could be video, like you're watching right now on YouTube. It could be pictures. It could be audio. It could be all kinds of things. These days, even your text messages and a lot of our voice calls are actually going through the internet. They're being carried over those lines rather than a telephone line like we used to have, and still do, just not in use quite as much. Very few people still have dial-up internet. AOL is not doing as hot as they used to be. So that's what the internet is. The web is the stuff going over the internet. It's part of a protocol, HTTP. We'll talk a little more about that later, but basically think of the internet as the roads and the highways throughout the country. And the web is everything going over that. It's a ton of pages and different text documents, nowadays videos and pictures too, that are all getting sent over that. So that's kind of the difference. Whenever you hear somebody saying they're hopping on the internet, I mean, they kind of are. But most of the time, what people are thinking of is actually the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web is controlled by the WW3C. You probably know WW3C schools. Great resource if you're ever looking things up. If anybody needs to look up any kind of particular topic, I usually direct them to either W3C or to Indian, which is a Mozilla. Mozilla is kind of the spin-off of the old Netscape browser. That's how they kind of survived after the browser wars. They have amazing resources, extremely well detailed. Um, as far as how the internet came to be, it actually goes really far back in a very technical way, back to Nikola Tesla. Back in the early 1900s, he actually had some ideas about a world wireless system, which is kind of amazing, but that was kind of his gig. He also thought we should have like wireless electricity, things like that. He was an inventor, kind of the nemesis almost to Thomas Edison. The two of them were constantly competing. Really great mind. Then time went on. It was really the 1960s when the idea of the internet kicked off. Even though we didn't really have the hardware side totally nailed yet, out of MIT, there's J.C.R. Licklider. He kind of had this idea of an intergalactic network of computers, literally an intergalactic network. That was his terminology for it. It became popular. People kept thinking, hey, like this is something we can do. We did have the basics of that. We have computers at that time. They're all around. They're huge, massive computers, but at the same time, we have computers. There are even local networks at that time. We talk about a computer terminal sometimes, and we're thinking of just an individual computer. But back then, it actually was a terminal. There would be one massive computer down in the basement of whatever office building it was, and what we would think of as each person's computer was just a terminal that connected on to that giant computer to do whatever they needed to get done. Um, things kind of kicked off when packet switching became popular. You don't need to know too much about that. If you want to get really deep into any of this, you can always do it. There's tons of resources on the history of the World Wide Web and the internet online. Great movies too. There's an awesome documentary, Lo Behold, talking about what I'm about to talk about right now, and that's ARPANET. ARPANET was kind of bankrolled and pushed by the U.S. Department of Defense. It stands for Advanced Research Projects Agency Network. Uh, the idea was that they wanted one single network to do communication. Obviously, that has huge potential for the military and then also on the civil side too, even though that probably wasn't totally what the Department of Defense was thinking of at that time. But they were able to get a lot of scientists working on that. It became huge within the colleges. Obviously, MIT worked on it. UCLA and Stanford were big as far as that early ARPANET. They had great communication. And again, even the World Wide Web, the idea of these text documents were really from a research standpoint until pretty well into the 90s. I know it sounds crazy that we've only really been using it that way for that little bit of time, about like what, 25, barely 30 years, but it's true. It was mainly used to move around text documents, research documents, even HTTP. It's a hypertext transfer protocol. It all has to do with text originally. So getting back to UCLA and Stanford, that was actually the first time we communicated on ARPANET. They sent a message from UCLA to Stanford. They were trying to think of something really small that they could get across because it was just a test and they really weren't sure it was going to happen. And they were even using, these computers they were using were like the size of a small house on both sides just to get this across. And literally they were sending the word login, and even the word login crashed the computers and they only got LO out, hence the documentary Lo Behold. Yeah, pretty cool stuff. I know it sounds crazy, but that's how it worked. Later on, late 80s, early 90s, it was like 1989, 1990. That's when you might have heard of Tim Berners-Lee. He invented the World Wide Web and HTTP. That was kind of his baby. His idea was to have this giant linking network and rules that managed text, like all these text documents that we were going to be sending around. He was doing work out at CERN in Switzerland, and later on, the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, they kind of guided this and took over. They're really the powerhouse behind the World Wide Web. They come up with a lot of the rules, the protocols. They do a lot of that stuff. So there's a reason W3C Schools is so big. There's a reason Mozilla, the Mozilla Developer Network, is such a big deal because Mozilla was one of the first ones in under the Netscape brand. They were one of the first ones in as far as the browser game, actually making it so that everybody could access this stuff, because that's basically what a browser is it's just a piece of software that's taking all of this data that's getting thrown around, all of these little packets, and turning it into a consumable thing. It's putting all the little bits together so that all of your text lines up the way it should. All the text even shows up in the first place, that the images show up. Even the rates at which this is going on, like we all know video files take a really long time to get anywhere. It's a lot of data. And then images, a little less time, definitely, because it's just a single image rather than a ton of images, but it still takes longer than just plain text. So that's kind of what's happening with these packets, is everything's getting broken down by the server into all these little bits and sent across the internet. And some areas might have traffic. We talked about them being like roads. There might be a lot of data going through a particular line, so they might send things down other lines. They might have a weird roundabout way to get there. The text is obviously going to get there quicker than the images, and the images quicker than the video. So what your browser is doing is putting all of this stuff together as it comes in and making it so you don't have to sit there till the very last packet shows up, the very last packet before you can actually see anything or use anything. That's why if you ever see a website where they have a ton of huge image files, it might take forever for those things to load up, and you probably see the text show up on your browser first. And then you'll see like maybe one image at a time kind of crawl on. There's a reason we optimize our images, optimize our video, so that that doesn't happen and you have a better experience. But that's what's going on there. Um, so I think that pretty much covers everything. If you have any more detailed questions, definitely ask, reach out. I can always edit this video or I can reach out individually. And again, check around at a lot of the resources out there. It's a fascinating topic, especially how people were doing this early on because it just took so many resources and it was really people thinking at the cutting edge of like what could be rather than what was. So I hope you have a great day. Thanks again for listening, and as always, subscribe below so I can keep this free. Hope you have a good one. Bye.